The Punic Wars were a series of 3 wars between Rome and Carthage. The first 2 were fought in the Western Mediterranean, while the third took place all over the Mediterranean. But why were these wars fought? Well, to answer that question, let's do some history. The First Punic War was fought between 264 and 241 BCE at this point. Both Rome and Carthage were rising powers. Carthage controlled most of the Western Mediterranean, while Rome controlled the Italian peninsula. But there was one key difference between the two. Rome had a navy, but it wasn't very big. Carthage, on the other hand, had one of the largest navies in the Mediterranean. And so when fighting broke out between the two over the control of this tiny island here, which was strategically important, because guess what? Another power would use it as a naval base. Carthage had the advantage. But despite being outmatched, Rome actually won the war. How did they do it? Well, they simply built more ships. And at the end of the war, they controlled Sicily and Sardinia as well as this tiny island. But this victory didn't come cheap. The war had bankrupted Rome, and it would be a long time before they could afford another war. Luckily for them, Carthage would start one. See, after winning the First Punic War, Rome and Carthage had become rivals. They were fighting over the same things. But it was clear that Rome was the superior power. And so Carthage tried to make allies with other Mediterranean powers to help them win a war. But Rome wasn't having it. And so they started the war by invading this tiny island here. This was a disaster for Carthage. They lost the island, and their navy was no match for Rome's. And so after just 3 years, Carthage sued for peace. But Rome wasn't done with them yet. They also wanted revenge for the First Punic War. And so they took this opportunity to take more land from Carthage, including their naval bases. Humiliated, Carthage would spend the next 50 years preparing for war, training their army, making new alliances, and building a new navy. And when the Second Punic War broke out, they were ready. Led by their brilliant general, Hannibal, Carthage was able to defeat Rome in battle after battle, even though Rome had the bigger army. But despite their military victories, Hannibal was ordered to invade Italy. And although he was successful at first, eventually Rome was able to defeat him. And just like the last war, Rome took more land from Carthage. But this time, they took their cities too. In fact, they would continue to fight even after Carthage sued for peace. And it wasn't until 3 years later that the war would finally end. And when it did, Carthage was a shadow of its former self. Rome now controlled all of the Western Mediterranean, and Carthage would never become a naval power again. But Rome still wasn't done with them. Oh, no. Not even close. You see, Rome had taken so much land from Carthage that they were basically right on the Nile, and so it didn't take long for them to start the third and final Punic War, the most destructive of the 3, where Rome would take Carthage's last remaining territories and eventually sack the city itself. But that's a story for another time. If you want to watch the entire series, click here.